This world doesn't change with sunrise or seasons. It changes on a schedule. From orbit it looks quiet enough, a marsh planet wrapped in haze, but stay long enough and you notice the pattern. The air thickens, visibility collapses, then just as precisely, everything clears again. Over and over, always the same. Below the fog, the surface moves in sync. Vast circular structures pulse beneath the swamp. Channels shift. Life waits for the brief windows when the mist pulls back. This is a planet ruled by timing, and nothing here is out of step. From a distance, this world is easy to spot. It moves in a wide, steady path around a pale, swollen star, a star that's just a little larger and cooler than the sun you're used to. The light it gives off isn't harsh white, but a soft, faintly amber glow that smooths the edges of everything it touches. A little closer in toward that star, a rocky planet wrapped in dirty ice glints weakly. A little farther out, a dark gas giant drags a loose train of moons behind it like a slow procession. And in between those two, held at just the right distance for liquid to cling and linger, is the marsh world. From far out, it doesn't look like a classic blue marble. There's almost no clean color to lock onto. Instead, most of the globe is smudged with grey-green and pale brown, veiled beneath a layer of haze that looks, at first glance, like a permanent overcast. Only a few scattered regions near the poles show glints of open water reflecting the star. If you keep watching, though, something very strange happens. The planet's face doesn't stay the same. The haze that seems painted over the surface thickens and then thins, not randomly, not in patches, but across whole regions at once. Broad belts of fog swell until they almost completely swallow the surface, then after a precise span of time draw back again, like curtains being opened in perfect coordination. From orbit you would see it as a slow repeating change in contrast. First the world dulls, its details swallowed by pale, bright blur. Then exactly on cue, the blur slackens, drains, and the underlying swamps and dark channels sharpen into view again. Not once every day, not tied to sunrise or sunset, but several times each hour, all across the planet. It's as if the air itself is on a schedule. The pattern is so regular that you could mark time by it. One phase, the mist spreads, rising from countless points on the surface at once. Another phase, the mist settles and thins, gathering low, retreating back to wherever it came from. In between, there's a brief intermission when the atmosphere clears enough for the planet to show you its true colors, if you happen to be watching at the right moment. Draw closer, and you start to pick out more detail. The clouds high above the world are surprisingly sparse. There are streaks of vapor, yes, slender arcs circling along lines of constant latitude, but there's nothing like the thick, churning storm bands of a gas giant, and nothing like the broad continental cloud systems of an Earth-like world. Instead, most of the action happens much lower, close to the ground, in a layer that hugs the surface like a second skin. The overall shape of the world is slightly flattened at the poles, the way you'd expect from a planet that spins at a respectable rate. Its day is short, just a little over 14 Earth hours from one sunrise to the next. That quick spin helps spread heat around so that no region is completely frozen, but not so much that storms tear the atmosphere apart. The result is a world that, on paper, shouldn't look so strange. A bit wet, a bit cool, but well within the range where life could have taken hold. The star's light glances off the thin upper atmosphere, catching particles of dust and ice that give the sky from above a faint metallic sheen. There's a slight greenish tint to it, thanks to gases you're not breathing anytime soon. The air down below is dense and heavy, packed with vapor and organic chemicals exhaled by whatever is churning away in the marshes. You pass through the high, quiet layer of the atmosphere almost without noticing it. Up here, above the mists, everything is calm. Instruments, if you had them, would show a gentle wind, a mild temperature gradient, nothing dramatic. No lightning storms crackling from horizon to horizon, No towering thunderheads. Just a thin wash of haze and the steady pull of gravity, a little stronger than Earth's, pressing down on everything. Then you descend further, and the character of the air begins to change. The light from the star dims as more particles crowd into the path between you and space. Colors flatten. The bright point of the star spreads into a softer disk, haloed by diffuse glare. The sky, which at high altitude was a deep, reassuring darkness, becomes washed out, almost silvery, as if someone has stretched a fine veil across your line of sight. Below, the surface is still mostly hidden. You catch glimpses of it when the mists are in their thinning phase, broad, dark wetlands linking together into almost continuous oceans of mud and shallow water. There are no continents in the way you're used to thinking of them. The solid crust barely rises above the global marsh, forming low, drowned plateaus rather than proud dry land. Here and there, long chains of slightly higher ground wind through the swamps, like the ridges of old worn-down mountain ranges barely managing to keep their heads above the water. They aren't dry either. They're simply less submerged, wrapped in layers of saturated soil, spongy mats, and tangled vegetation that hasn't yet decided whether it wants to be fully aquatic. As the mists begin one of their thickening phases, you see where they start. They don't appear randomly in the air. They rise, almost in unison, from specific points scattered across the surface. They well up from cracks, from pools, from broad circular patches that, from this height, look like pale coins set into the darker marsh. Each of those circles acts like a vent. For a few seconds they glow slightly brighter as they release fresh vapor and faint luminescence into the air, and then that vapor spills sideways, spreading and merging with that from neighboring circles. There are hundreds of thousands of these circles, maybe millions, dotting the planet like a quiet, regular array. Some are only a few dozen meters across. Others are vast, spanning kilometers. From above, during the clear phase, you can see that many of them are not just holes or pools, but structures of some kind. Rings raised slightly above the surrounding mire, edged with ridges, all centered around darker cores, and they all act together. When the cycle begins, a faint shimmer appears above each circular patch. Vapor streams upward in tall, narrow columns. A few moments later, those columns spread, sideways and outward, overlapping, until you can no longer tell which mist belonged to which circle. The layer thickens, brightens in the star's light, and the surface is gone again. It's not fast. It takes a few minutes for the change to complete. During that time, the world below blurs gradually, details smearing into the white-grey of the fog. It's slow enough that if you watched with patient eyes, you could track the line of encroaching opacity as it sweeps across a region, swallowing forests, channels, and lakes in turn. Then, just as steadily, the whole process reverses. The mist sinks, loses body, and begins to flow back downward toward the same circular sites that produced it. Visibility returns not in patchy windows, but as a wide opening across whole stretches of the planet at once. Patterns on the ground sharpen, lines of water and land snap back into place, and the world feels briefly exposed. The timing is precise. If you measured it, you would find that each cycle lasts exactly the same length, down to fractions of a second. The intervals do not drift with the warmth of the day or the cool of the night. They do not vary from one hemisphere to another. On every side of the planet, in every marsh basin and on every half-drowned plateau, the mists follow the same schedule. From outside, it gives the impression that the entire atmosphere is being gently pumped. You move deeper through the upper edges of the mist layer. The particles around you become thicker, colder to the touch. Small droplets cling together, forming tiny beads that hang in the air longer than they ought to under this gravity, supported by faint updrafts you can't feel directly but can see in the way the fog shifts and curls. Despite the density of the vapor, the air does not feel violent. There's no roaring gust, no chaotic turbulence. Instead, the movement is smooth, guided, almost mechanical. The mists do not simply billow at random. They slide along invisible pathways, rising and falling in smooth sheets, as if the whole layer is being directed by some deep, steady process beneath the surface. Every so often, the fog thins enough to show you a clear patch of the world below. You see sprawling networks of channels, narrow and winding, branching and rejoining in intricate patterns. Dark water creeps through them, sluggish and thick. On either side of these channels lie mats of life, broad, flat growths that look, from up here, like overlapping scales. Some are deep green, some almost black, some tinged with faint copper or violet. They stretch in great continuous carpets across the marshes, sometimes forming circular clearings at their centres, the same circles you saw from higher up. Around the higher ridges, the mats rise into pillars, domes, and ridged shelves, growing on top of themselves layer after layer, as if they've been slowly building structure for an extremely long time. Where the ground rises slightly more, stunted, flexible towers of fibrous material push into the air, bending under the weight of moisture, then straightening again as the mists lift and water drains. Between cycles, when the atmosphere is at its clearest, light from the star can reach all the way down to the marsh surface. It arrives filtered and softened by the upper haze, taking on that same amber tone that started near the star itself. In those brief windows, the world below glows with muted colour, greens and browns and dull metallic blues, everything slick with water and wrapped in a constant, shining dampness. But those windows are short. Before long, the next wave of vapour begins to climb. This world doesn't have towering mountain ranges or deep, dry basins. Its main feature is this: an almost planet-wide, shallow ocean of mud and water and living structure, covered and uncovered by a repeating blanket of fog. From space, it looks simple. Haze brightens, haze dims. From closer in, you begin to sense how tightly tuned it all is. The cycles are not a background effect. They are the defining feature of the planet. Air pressure fluctuates in step with the mist, just enough to be measurable. Temperature shifts, too, by a small but steady amount between phases. Gases are traded. Certain compounds build up in the clearing moments, then are pulled back down and reabsorbed during the thickening. Over countless cycles, this endless exchange has shaped the world's climate into something stable but deeply peculiar. If you had sensitive enough instruments, you'd notice that the sources of the mist, those circular structures in the swamp, are not strictly passive. They're not just vents. They expand and contract very slightly in sync with the cycles. Their outer rings flex. Their central regions darken and lighten. The entire array of circles, scattered across the globe, ticks along like a vast network of timers, all set to the same beat. You are still above all of that intricacy, hovering in the zone where the upper edge of the mist frays into the clearer air above. Here, visibility changes from minute to minute. One moment, you can see 100 kilometers to the horizon, tracing the arcs of ridges and channels. The next, a pale wall moves in, and the world shrinks to a soft, glowing whiteness, punctuated only by occasional hints of darker shapes below. In this layer, the sound, if you could hear it, would be mostly muted. The thick, wet air would swallow distant noise. Only slow, deep movements would carry, the faint roll of large masses stirring below the water's surface, the distant groan of land that is not entirely solid, settling and shifting under its own weight. There is no sign, yet, of towers or cities, or anything that looks like technology. If intelligence lives here, it doesn't announce itself with hard lines and sharp edges. What you see instead is coordination on a planetary scale. Those enormous circles acting in perfect agreement, the atmosphere rising and falling in exact intervals, the mists obeying a schedule that has remained steady by the look of the landscape for a very long time. For now, all you have is the view. A marsh planet wrapped in timed fog, circling a gentle star, sharing its orbit with a frozen inner neighbor and a distant brooding giant further out. No ship between you and it. No cockpit glass. Just the sense of drifting closer through layers of cold, heavy air, watching the planet's strange cycles play out again and again, like the turning of some enormous, patient mechanism that never misses a beat. Dropping lower into the atmosphere, the world changes in a way that feels gradual at first and then suddenly total. Up above, where the haze only skimmed the surface of things, you still had that sense of overall shape. Continents that aren't really continents, faint ridges, long water channels cutting through the marsh. But the moment you sink into the upper reaches of the mist cycle, all of that pulls away from you. The sky tightens, distances fold in. The air grows heavier, thicker, until every direction feels closer than it should be. The mist here isn't just moisture, it's loaded with microscopic particles released from the circular structures below, each one dense enough to scatter light far more efficiently than a normal fog. The result is an atmosphere that doesn't just obscure, it distorts. Far-off shapes smear sideways into elongated shadows. A ridge that ought to be 50 kilometers away appears for a moment as if it's only 5, then dissolves into nothing when the cycle shifts again. For long stretches you see nothing except the slow drift of brightness and shadow inside the fog. The star's amber light gets caught and pulled apart, leaving faint vertical streaks that hover in the air like reflections on rippling water. Every so often, a break in the mist opens like a slit in fabric, narrow and fleeting, showing a piece of the world below, a curve of vegetation, a glint of wet ground, a pale ring shining slightly too evenly to be natural rock, and then the slit closes again, and you're back inside softness. The air presses differently here. It doesn't buffet or push, it settles, gently but insistently, like the weight of deep water. The pressure increases with every meter you descend, though not dangerously. Just enough to make it clear the atmosphere is thick with dissolved gases and biological vapor. The world below is exhaling, and even though you're still high above the surface, you can sense it in the way the air seems to hold a faint warmth, a slow pulse of chemical change rolling through it. As the opacity shifts, small details begin to anchor themselves. There are vertical plumes rising from below, not constantly, but in long, steady intervals that coincide with the start of each thickening phase. They aren't violent. Each plume rises like a quiet column of steam from a vent, widening as it climbs until it merges with the surrounding fog. You notice that they appear in coordinated clusters, 10 here, 30 there, a long curved line stretching for what must be hundreds of meters. Every cluster is arranged around a circular structure on the ground. If you watch closely, you can see something else. The mist doesn't rise evenly from each circle. Some circles grow brighter first, pulsing faintly from within their cores. Others activate slightly later, as if each group is part of a larger network, passing signals along in a sequence so quick and smooth it looks simultaneous unless you're really paying attention. This close to the cycles, the timing becomes impossible to ignore. A countdown begins the moment the last mist sinks. The air settles into clarity. Shapes below sharpen. You have perhaps 3 minutes of relatively open visibility before faint ripples start climbing upward again. Those ripples widen, rising slowly at first, then accelerating, not chaotically, but in a controlled swell that reaches the exact altitude you're in now, spreads around you in a cool, shimmering layer, then thickens into a near-solid sheet of fog. The visibility drops in stages, 10 kilometers. 5, 2, then only meters ahead, and even those meters shift in hue and brightness so quickly that you're left guessing whether the darker patch you saw is land or just a denser pocket of air. As the fog tightens further, you catch a faint, steady vibration in the air. Not a sound, more like a pressure change that repeats at intervals too regular to ignore. You feel it more than you hear it, a deep, low-frequency tremor that ripples through the mist layer every time a new cluster of circles begins its emission. It doesn't disrupt anything. It doesn't shake the world. It simply marks time, like something moving far beneath the marsh. The descent becomes almost dreamlike. Without clear landmarks, your sense of distance twists. One moment you feel as though you're still high above the ground. The next, a huge shadow looms beneath you. A wide, gently curving shape with raised edges, unmistakably one of the giant circular organisms. The fog thins just enough to reveal its structure, a perfect ring of pale tissue ribbed along its outer edge, half submerged in dark marsh water. The interior is darker, almost black, with faint lines radiating from the center like spokes. Then the fog thickens again, and you lose it. A few seconds later, another shape appears, a ridge of vegetation, heavy with moisture, slumped under its own weight. It bends slightly as the mist cycle shifts, almost as though whatever grows there has adapted to the constant expansion and contraction of the atmosphere. Droplets bead along every strand, forming long filaments of shining water that sway softly even when there's no wind to move them. Here and there, patches of open water sit between the mats and ridges. They look black at first, then reveal faint metallic glints from dissolved minerals or suspended organic matter. Some of these pools give off wisps of vapor even outside the cycle. Others lie still, waiting for the next coordinated surge. The fog thins suddenly. The timing is exact. The clearing phase has begun again. The world below sharpens into something coherent for the first time since you entered the mist layer. The details are startling. You're now close enough to see that the circular organisms aren't just passive bodies embedded in the swamp. They have structure, raised walls, textured surfaces, layered ridges that contract inward by a few millimeters as the mist drains. Their outer rings ripple in slow waves, almost imperceptible unless you stare. The inner core darkens, then lightens again as part of the cycle resets. Hundreds of these structures fill the landscape around you, each one enormous, each one connected through a network of channels that now gleam silver in the clearing light. Some of the channels look natural, shaped by water flow. Others, not quite. They curve too smoothly. They meet at angles that feel intentional, even though there is no machinery, no obvious construction. Just organic shapes behaving with the precision of engineered systems. Vegetation blankets everything else. Thick mats, webbed structures, towering spines that curl under the weight of condensed moisture. The mats move subtly as the pressure changes. Some sections swell slightly during the thickening phase and flatten again during the thinning. Everything here breathes in its own way, even though you promised yourself you wouldn't use that word. But there's no metaphor to it. These organisms literally expand and contract in sync with the atmospheric cycle, as if built for it. As you drift lower, the air grows warm and carries a faint tang, a chemical signature of an ecosystem constantly recycling the very mist that surrounds it. It's not unpleasant, just unfamiliar. Sharp, mineral-rich, mixed with the soft scent of wet vegetation breaking down and regrowing endlessly. The ground is still out of reach, but the planet finally feels close. Not distant, not theoretical. Close. The mists begin to gather again. You see the first ripples climbing the air from the circles below, forming thin lines that weave together into a rising sheet. You know what's coming next. Another full phase of near blindness. Another shift in the atmosphere's density. Another moment where the world below pulls itself out of view, leaving only fleeting shapes to hint at what lies beneath. But you also know this. Whatever is happening here is not simple. It's not a random geological effect. It's not weather in any familiar sense. It's systematic, planet-wide, and entirely too coordinated to be brushed aside as background biology. You're still descending toward the surface, and the world is preparing its next cycle, gathering its mist in perfect formation, as if inviting you to come closer and see what else it has been hiding. The lower atmosphere of this world feels less like a place you pass through and more like a boundary you ease into. There's a moment, subtle but unmistakable, where the fog stops acting like a veil wrapped around the air and starts behaving like part of the terrain. It thickens horizontally, not just vertically, so the world around you shifts from sky to something closer to a forest of vapor. Layers of moisture hang at different heights, some drifting sideways in thin sheets, some clinging to the ground in rippling blankets. You're close enough now that each phase of the mist cycle feels larger, heavier, more immediate. When the thickening begins, it doesn't just blur the horizon, it swallows every edge you were just starting to recognize. The circular organisms below release their vapors again, and even though you're still dozens of meters above them, you feel the pressure shift. A deep, steady swell rolls upward through the air as the entire layer charges with moisture. It doesn't buffet you, but it surrounds you with a quiet intensity, the way a rising tide wraps itself around pillars on a coastline. When the thinning phase arrives, it's equally distinct. The fog loosens. Droplets gather and fall in delicate chains. Light sharpens. Shapes pull themselves into focus like shadows deciding to grow substance. This constant back and forth would be disorienting on any other world, but here the rhythm, no, not rhythm, pattern, keeps everything stable, predictable, controlled. The planet breathes on a schedule, and now you're close enough to feel the timing in your skin. The world beneath finally shows itself with more clarity. The marsh isn't a shallow basin with occasional puddles. It's a massive planet-wide network of interlinked wetlands that might as well be a sea. The dry ground consists of raised mats, spongy plateaus, and braided roots forming thick, tangled platforms that never quite break the surface tension of the water. The divisions between land and liquid are more conceptual than real. Pools stretch across these marshes like dark mirrors. Some are lined with plant matter so dense they form perfect circular frames. Others are bare, their edges smooth and scalloped from years of subtle erosion caused by the mist's constant cycling. And then there are the giant circles. Now that you're closer, their true size becomes clearer. Some are small, several meters across at most, while others are enormous, spanning hundreds of meters, their outer ridges standing just above the waterline. The largest ones look like sunken arenas or colossal biological rings. Their surfaces are patterned with faint grooves arranged in spirals, radiating outward until they meet the cracked, fibrous outer rim. A few of them rise slightly during the clearing phase, not enough to break the surface tension dramatically, but enough to suggest some sort of internal pressure change. They bulge and flatten with an eerie uniformity, never sloppy or random, always controlled, always timed with the air around them. Between the circles, mats of vegetation stretch in continuous sheets. Some are smooth and glossy, others textured with fine ridges that look almost like veins running through their surface. Certain mats curl upward at the edges, forming low walls that corral shallow pools. Others sag inward, forming bowl-like depressions constantly filling and draining with the mist cycles. The colors are muted but striking when the light hits them right. Deep greens, dull browns, faded ochres, and occasional streaks of metallic blue or copper. These metallic hues shift slightly with the angle of the light, hinting at embedded minerals or perhaps microorganisms using reflective compounds to regulate their exposure during the clear phases. Everywhere you look, the landscape seems shaped by slow, patient processes that have nothing to do with tectonic force or weather patterns. It's as though everything here, every ridge, every mat, every waterway, has been constructed by long-term biological persistence, layer by layer, cycle by cycle, over ages. During one of the clearing phases, visibility stretches far enough to reveal something even stranger. The channels connecting the circles don't wander randomly. From above they seemed almost organic. But down here you can see they hold geometric tendencies. Not strict geometry, nothing perfect enough to claim intention outright, but close. Too close for coincidence. Long, shallow trenches curve around each other in broad arcs. Some intersect in triangular formations. Others create branching shapes reminiscent of circuitry, or root networks shaped by something more than mere growth. They feel deliberate without announcing themselves as such. It raises a question. Are these just biological systems that evolved in extreme coordination? Or is the entire marsh reacting to something deeper, something planetary, steering its growth into order? The air near the surface is warmer still. It carries a faint, earthy tang, heavy with organic compounds, not rotting, not festering, but active, alive, constantly breaking down and rebuilding. When the mist thickens again, the effect is overwhelming this close to the source. The fog erupts from the circular structures in enormous rolling sheets. It rises quickly now that you're near the base of the process, filling the world around you with pale, shifting gradients. You can only see a few meters at most. Beyond that, everything dissolves into white-grey emptiness. Occasionally, the shadow of a massive circle looms through the haze like a ghost outline before fading again. You hear soft impacts, droplets condensing and falling back into the marsh below. Every so often, a low groan travels through the air, coming from the shifting mats that expand slightly with the new moisture, then settle under their own weight. If your sense of distance was distorted before, now it's practically gone. Depth and scale twist freely here. A ridge rises in front of you like a dark cliff, then reveals itself as a harmless clump of vegetation when the mist thins. A circular shape appears, enormous and looming, then shrinks into a much smaller structure when its true edges become visible. The lower atmosphere is a maze without walls, a place defined entirely by cycles of visibility. Yet there's no chaos, no unpredictability. Even disoriented, you can feel the consistency beneath every shift. The fog comes and goes on cue. The organisms below follow their pattern as if wired into the planet's core. The air pressure moves like a tide. Even the faint vibrations you sense in the mist pulse with unwavering precision. And the most unsettling realization hits you quietly. Nothing here is out of sync. Not a single circle, not a single patch of vegetation, not a single atmospheric chamber. Everything follows the same timing. Everything responds together. If something drives this world, it drives all of it. The next clearing phase begins slowly. The brightness around you fades. Droplets fall back into the marsh, hissing softly as they touch certain chemical-rich pools. Shapes begin forming in the haze again, first vague outlines, then solid features. You're closer to the surface than ever, and the world is preparing to show you a little more of itself. How much more depends entirely on how long this clearing window lasts, and what happens to be directly beneath you when the fog finally parts. The clearing phase arrives slowly this time, as if the planet is giving you a chance to adjust before it shows you something new. The mist thins first at the edges where the air feels slightly warmer. Droplets slide off one another, merging into heavier beads that fall straight down in delicate streams. There's no rainfall sound, just soft, damp impacts, swallowed instantly by the swamp's spongy surface. Visibility stretches from a few meters to perhaps 20, then 50. And then, finally, the lower atmosphere parts enough that you can see the ground properly for the first time. The surface is nothing like a typical marshland. There's no clear separation, no dry mounds rising above the water or clean pools sitting apart from the vegetation. Everything bleeds into everything else. The water has the thickness of liquid full of life, cloudy, slow-moving, layered with biological debris that settles and lifts again with the mist cycles. The ground is a patchwork of raised mats, fiber clusters, swollen pads of plant matter, and tangled root systems that bind together into one continuous world. And right below, dominating the landscape, is one of the giant circular organisms. Up close, it's enormous, easily the size of a small stadium. The outer ring rises 1/2 meter above the marsh water, built from thickened layers of fibrous tissue that look almost like petrified wood, except they're soft where the mist has recently passed through. The ring's surface is ribbed, each rib only a few centimeters high, but tight enough that the pattern looks engineered rather than grown. The core of the circle is sunken slightly, and the material there is darker, almost blue-black. It has a strange matte quality, as though it absorbs light rather than reflecting it. Thin lines run from the center to the rim in perfect radial symmetry, not sharp lines, just faint changes in texture, subtle enough to disappear unless you look directly at them. It becomes obvious why the mist vents rise from these things. You can see small pores opening and closing along the inner ring, timed so precisely that even now, between cycles, they flutter in preparation for the next release. Some dilate gently, inhaling moisture. Others constrict, storing chemical vapors that will be expelled upward at the appropriate moment. The cycle hasn't restarted yet, so the world gives you a rare chance to study what exists between the fog. The ground around the organism is alive, constantly shifting, swelling, sinking. It's not violent movement, more like slow tides inside the vegetation itself. Mats of plant tissue expand as they soak up water, then slump when the internal pressure evens out. Long, coiling tendrils slide under the surface of the marsh, barely visible except for the faint ripples they leave behind. Even the water doesn't lie still. Chemical reactions simmer quietly within it, barely visible but always active. Every few seconds, small bubbles rise from below, collecting under the floating mats before escaping in tiny bursts. To the left, a ridge of root-like structures arcs upward, creating a kind of natural walkway, raised just enough above the water that you can see how the plant matter grips together, fiber to fiber, forming a braided pattern like twisted cables. These aren't ordinary roots, they're load-bearing structures built over centuries by whatever produced them, constantly reinforcing themselves with new layers as the older ones decay. And threading through the world are the channels. From above, they look like tangled rivers. Down here, you can see they are trenches, sunken waterways lined with a strange waxy substance that prevents them from collapsing. The water inside them moves with a slow, deliberate pull, tugged along by changes in pressure between one circle and the next. It's not current in the usual sense. It's more like the entire marsh shifts minutely in the direction of the next cycle. Every few minutes, the ground exhales in preparation for the thickening phase. No mist rises yet, it's too early for that, but you can feel the moment coming. A faint tremor moves through the vegetation, passing from one circle to the next. The pressure tilts slightly, the same way the air inside a sealed room changes when someone opens a distant door. The entire landscape tightens, just a fraction. Pores along the circular organism dilate again, and the mats nearby flatten themselves more firmly against the water. This is the reset stage, the world preparing itself for the next release. Before the mist returns, something else catches your eye. A narrow structure sits half-submerged not far from the circle, a bent column of tuber-like material rising perhaps 2 meters above the swamp. It tapers toward the top and ends in a broad pad shaped a bit like a funnel. Inside the funnel is a thick gel that glistens faintly with amber light. You watch it for a moment before realizing it isn't just holding moisture. It's reacting to the air. The gel pulses in small, steady contractions that sync perfectly with the faint tremors you've been feeling. Not as pronounced as the huge circle, but definitely part of the same system. All at once, you understand that the giant organisms aren't isolated. The whole swamp is a connected network of structures, each one playing a different role in the atmospheric cycle. Some release vapor, some store it, some shape the air currents, some probably regulate gas composition. It's less like a marsh and more like a living machine built on a planetary scale. The mist begins to rise again, It doesn't erupt all at once. First, a thin shimmer appears above the circular core. Then, faint lines of vapor stretch upward, like pale threads climbing through the air. They widen, thickening into a sheet that climbs with surprising speed. Within seconds, the first layer of fog blankets the surrounding landscape, swallowing the trench waterways and the lower parts of the vegetation. You can still see the top of the circle for the moment, the outer rim rising like an island above the fog, but that won't last. The fog creeps up its sides, filling in every groove, pooling along the ribs. The darker inner core disappears under rising vapor, and the whole structure becomes little more than a pale silhouette. More circles join in. Dozens of mist plumes ignite across the region, their vapors merging into one immense wave that rolls outward in all directions. The warm amber light from the star catches the mist as it climbs, turning everything into a diffuse glow. The sky fades into a soft gradient of white-grey, washed clean of any sharp lines. Within minutes, the clearing window is gone. The world plunges back into near opacity. Shapes dissolve. Distances vanish again. Only the faintest outlines remain, brief shadows inside ever-thickening fog. But now, unlike earlier descents, you're familiar with the sequence. You know what the surface is doing beneath the veil. You know which structures are rising, which are releasing vapor, which are expanding or contracting in this exact moment, and you're aware of something else. This cycle is too stable to be accidental, too coordinated, too old, too perfect. The surface has shown you only a fraction of what it hides. Beneath the water, inside the marsh strata, deeper structures must exist to drive all this. Vast networks connecting one circle to hundreds of others, shaping how the air behaves above the entire planet. The fog thickens until the world vanishes again. But you're no longer an outsider drifting through it. You're beginning to understand the system. And the deeper you go, the more obvious it becomes that this world isn't just alive. It's organized. Very, very organized. The thickening phase has fully taken over again, and this time the fog doesn't just swallow the world, it seems to rearrange the concept of space itself. Everything compresses. Sound, distance, color, even the air feels folded in on itself. You lose sight of the circle behind you within seconds, replaced by a soft, uniform brightness that hides more than darkness ever could. But now that you've seen the surface up close, the fog doesn't feel empty anymore. You know exactly what's happening beneath it, even if you can't see it. You can picture the giant rings flexing gently, pores expanding and contracting with millimeter precision, vegetation mats shifting under the change in pressure, channels adjusting their slow currents as the atmosphere loads with moisture. So when the ground trembles again, a faint, deep movement that rolls outward like a wave, you're ready for it. Not alarmed, just attentive. The tremor passes through the fog layer, brushing past you like a soft shove. Then, beneath the whiteness, a subtle glow rises from somewhere nearby. At first it's just a vague brightness, diffused and shapeless, but it intensifies enough that the fog around you turns faintly amber, glowing from below rather than above. It's coming from another one of the giant circles. You drift toward it carefully. Not that toward has any solid meaning in this haze, but the glow gives you a reference point that nothing else does. As the light strengthens, the fog thins just enough that you begin to see faint outlines again, curved shadows, layered shapes, the vague geometry of something enormous waiting below. The clearing window hasn't started yet, so this visibility is coming entirely from the organism itself. That's new. When the shape resolves, you're surprised at how different this circle is from the one you saw before. The outer ring is thicker, taller, and segmented into wide plates that overlap like armor. Each plate rises slightly, forming a ridged crown around the structure. The inner surface, where the mist vents originate, glows with a pulsing amber light that sinks and rises in steady waves. This one isn't exhaling vapor yet. It's building pressure, preparing. charging its internal systems for the next release. The air around it hums softly. Not a sound in the usual sense, more like the vibration of something vast moving slowly beneath your feet. The glow intensifies with each pulse, lighting the fog in radiating patterns. The mist itself reacts, curling toward the organism as though pulled by invisible threads. And the most striking thing is the scale of the network around it. Dozens of smaller structures sit clustered nearby, thin stalks ending in cup-like tips, low domes coated in a waxy sheen, shallow basins filled with a thick, shimmering fluid. All of them pulse faintly in sync with the central circle. Some tighten and release, others emit threads of vapor that drift a meter before dissolving. Everything participates in the same pattern. This part of the marsh doesn't feel random at all. It feels built, not by hands or machines, but by a process that knows exactly what it's trying to accomplish. While you study these shapes, something shifts beneath the water. A long, dark form drifts slowly just below the surface, parallel to the outer ring of the organism. Not fast, not aggressive, just steady, deliberate movement. You catch only the faint outline through the murk, a silhouette that curves gently before disappearing under a mat of vegetation. It's impossible to tell whether it's a creature or another piece of the network. On this world, the line between organism and environment is thin. The clearing phase finally begins again. It's subtle at first. Droplets stop rising and begin falling instead. The fog lightens in patches, forming weak windows that open and close unpredictably. The amber glow from the circle dims, redirecting its energy downward, withdrawing everything it just built up. The fog thins further. The landscape spreads out around you, revealing far more structure than you expected. You're standing, well suspended, above a vast basin filled with interconnected organisms. Hundreds of circles of varying sizes dot the marsh. Some are fully submerged. Some are raised like islands. Some cluster together so tightly their outer rims touch. Shallow channels weave through them in branching patterns that mirror old river deltas, except these aren't formed by erosion. They're too regular, too evenly spaced, following a logic that's been maintained for generations of cycles. What looked chaotic from above now looks almost engineered. The vegetation between the circles forms repeating shapes, hexagonal mats, broad loops, ridges that align in long, sweeping arcs. It isn't perfect geometry, but it's organized enough to suggest one continuous process guiding all growth here. The clearing window strengthens further. Your view stretches across kilometers. A distant ridge emerges, low, rounded, coated in thick, dark vegetation. It looks almost like a barrier, dividing the basin from another region. At its highest point, a large circular structure sits half-buried, its rim broken in several places. Whatever happened to it must have been slow, not violent. The edges are softened, rounded, eroded by countless cycles. Even damaged, the organism still pulses weakly. Still participates in the pattern. Something clicks in your mind. The circles aren't independent life forms. They're components. Massive, semi-autonomous units in a sprawling planetary system. You watch as the mist drains entirely, leaving the air startlingly clear. The basin lights up under the soft amber from the star. Everything gleams with moisture. And now, without the fog hiding things, you notice something else. The ground level isn't flat. It slopes gently toward the circles, almost everywhere you look, just enough that water continuously returns to them, pulled by gravity and pressure alike. These organisms aren't just releasing mist. They're collecting it too, filtering it, recycling it, pushing it through the atmosphere on a schedule that never breaks. Nothing about this is accidental. The world isn't just alive, it's coordinated, directed on a scale that doesn't make sense for simple life. You study the basin again, letting the full pattern emerge, circles arranged across the landscape, channels connecting them like pathways, mist rising in perfectly timed intervals, veins of vegetation reinforcing everything, structures responding to pressure as one. It hits you with a strange mixture of awe and unease. This entire marsh might be a single organism, a world-sized system built from millions of living parts, each doing a tiny piece of the same job, and you've only descended into one basin. You look out at the fog beginning to gather again at the edges of the clearing window. Another cycle is coming, another rise, another fall. Another shift in the planet's giant, living mechanism. The world is preparing to hide itself again, but now you know enough to understand that every veil of mist isn't concealment. It's function, process, the natural behavior of something far older, far larger, and far more unified than any marshland could ever be by chance. The next wave of fog begins to rise, and the deeper you go, the clearer the truth becomes. This planet isn't simply alive, it's organized life, scaled up to the size of a world. And you haven't yet reached the structures that hold it all together. The next thickening phase rolls in faster than expected. Not chaotic, not uncontrolled, just accelerated, as if this basin's timing is slightly advanced compared to the region you came through earlier. Fog lifts from every circle around you in a sudden, unified surge. The air compresses again, temperature rising by a few degrees, pressure nudging against your senses like a slow, steady squeeze. Within 30 seconds, visibility collapses. Not in gentle stages this time. It's swallowed whole. Everything within a few steps becomes little more than a washed-out silhouette. Even the bright amber reflection of the star overhead seems to fade, diffused through the density of vapor until it's barely more than a pale smear. But losing sight of the surface doesn't feel like losing understanding anymore. If anything, you can now map the terrain in your head simply from the subtle tremors, the shifts in pressure, the way droplets move in currents pulled upward by the circles below. The system is predictable, not simple, just predictable. And for the first time, the fog feels less like a barrier and more like an invitation to explore what lies beneath it. You continue your descent, slow, steady, letting the mist part in faint waves around you. The air gets warmer still, with an unmistakable chemical sharpness threading through the moisture. Organic compounds, vapors expelled during the previous cycle, now pushed upward by their own heat before gravity, and the next thinning phase dragged them back down. Another deep tremor rolls outward beneath the swamp. This one feels different. It's broader, heavier, as if something far below the marsh has shifted its weight or redirected pressure in a wide arc. The realization hits you in a quiet, matter-of-fact way. This planet doesn't just move mist on the surface. There's something happening underneath, something deep, structural, driving everything above it. You keep descending until the fog thins just enough that the ground reappears in fragmented glimpses. Shadows settle into place, shapes gather outlines. Then the surface clarifies just long enough to show you something new. The ground here is split, not a crack like dried mud, not a natural fissure. A deliberate channel, wide, deep, and lined with a strange, bluff, flexible tissue that looks like a cross between hardened bark and cartilage. It stretches in a perfectly straight line for as far as the clearing window will allow you to see. Straight lines don't happen by accident in wetlands, not on this scale. The channel descends into darkness, a long, narrow throat carved through the vegetation mats and deep into the marsh strata. The edges pulse very faintly, expanding and contracting in slow intervals. This isn't erosion. This is maintenance. Some part of the system is keeping this channel open on purpose. You draw closer to the edge. The fog thins further, only a bit, but enough to see movement below. It takes several seconds to understand what you're looking at. Below the surface, beneath the water, beneath the mats, beneath the tangled roots, there is a second layer of living structure, a subsurface network. Thick, cable-like strands run along the walls of the channel, branching and rejoining in intricate patterns. Some strands pulse, moving fluid along their length. Others remain still, coated in a waxy secretion that gives them strength and flexibility. This isn't the root system of a plant. This is infrastructure. A moment later, something moves deeper inside the channel, slow, deliberate, like a colossal valve turning. The air around you trembles in perfect sync. The fog reacts immediately, tightening around the channel entrance as though responding to a shift in pressure. You lean inward, peering through the clearing window before it closes again. The subsurface network extends in every direction. Strands thicker than tree trunks run horizontally, others descend vertically like the supports of an enormous biological scaffold. The entire structure curves gently, following an arc far too consistent to be random. It hits you then. This subsurface layer isn't just beneath this basin. It's likely beneath every basin, every circle, every marsh. The surface organisms are only the topmost nodes of an entire planetary lattice. The clearing window narrows again. Fog creeps inward. Shapes dissolve. But now you know where to look, and you're already descending deeper. The fog thickens into a near-solid mass, but the ground feels closer. Moisture clings to everything, forming long strands that stretch between vegetation mats like spider silk. Occasionally, something tiny darts through the fog, too small to identify, a speck of life adapted to navigating these cycles without hesitation. The tremors return, more frequent now, though none of them feel dangerous. They're shifts of pressure, not warnings, movements of something large, but not hostile. A system adjusting its internal flow. Finally, the thinning phase begins again, slow and deliberate. Droplets roll downward, falling into dark puddles with soft, muted plinks. The fog retreats in sheets. The ground reappears, and this time the clearing lasts long enough to reveal exactly what the channel leads to. A vast cavity, not a cave, not an erosion pocket. A formed chamber, an intentional hollow in the marsh held open by thickened walls of fibrous tissue. The floor lies below the waterline, filled with a brackish mixture of liquid and organic slurry that churns in slow spirals. Floating on the surface are membranes stretched taut, anchored to the walls by strands of living cable. They pulse, slowly, steadily, perfectly timed. This chamber is a pressure regulator, a giant biological lung. No, not a lung, a reservoir, smoothing out the fluctuations in the subsurface network so that the mist cycles above remain steady. The existence of this chamber answers several questions while raising dozens more. If each basin has one of these, if each connects to thousands of surface circles, if each responds to global atmospheric timing, then the entire planet is not just cycling mist, it's modulating it, stabilizing conditions, maintaining balance, distributing chemicals, recycling vapor, regulating temperature, equalizing pressure. This isn't a marshland with life on it. This is a planetary superorganism using its atmosphere the way ordinary creatures use their internal fluids. And something deep below all this is controlling the timing. The clearing phase continues long enough for you to study the chamber closely. Its walls ripple in slow arcs. Chemical-rich droplets bead along the membranes, falling into the churning fluid below. Some sections bulge, others constrict, each adjustment smooth and unhurried. The subsurface network here isn't just structure, it's circulation. You glimpse several more channels branching from this chamber, some descending deeper, others climbing back toward the surface mists. They diverge with a precision that feels deliberate, each pathway reinforced by layers of toughened tissue. Then the mist begins its inevitable ascent once more. Fog rises from the circular organism behind you. The cavity dims, details soften. The visibility collapses again into the soft brightness that defines this world. But your perspective has shifted far more than the fog. The surface circles were only the beginning. The basin revealed the scale of the network. Now you've seen how the planet maintains that network, a hidden layer working tirelessly beneath the marsh. And you haven't yet reached the deepest part of the system. Whatever controls the timing, whatever ensures every cycle occurs down to the fraction of a second, still lies further below. The next descent doesn't happen all at once. It begins with a subtle shift in the mist itself, not thinning, not thickening, just changing texture. The vapor gains weight. Droplets cling together in longer strands, stretching before snapping. Every movement of air feels damp enough to coat your skin in seconds, even though no proper rain ever forms. It's the kind of atmosphere that wants to hold on to everything and pull it downward. You're entering the transition zone, the space between the surface network and the deeper system driving all of this. It becomes clearer the moment the ground under you gives way to a different kind of structure. The soft, spongy mats of vegetation fade, replaced by dense layers of fibrous material arranged in stacked sheets. These sheets bend under pressure, but only slightly, stiff enough to feel engineered, flexible enough to adapt to the continuous shifts in the mist cycle above. The fog thickens again, swallowing the last hints of the chamber you left behind. But now you can feel the terrain through the changes in vibration beneath your feet. Every step or drift sends back information, the density of the material, the tension in the fibers, the faint pulse of circulation running through the subsurface network. The world grows warmer again, not humid like the surface layers, but deeper, earthier. The air carries hints of minerals, faint metallic tangs from chemical processes moving through the strata below. You can tell you're getting closer to the core parts of the system. The atmosphere even feels heavier, richer in the gases the planet constantly cycles through its living machinery. Then something unexpected happens. The fog around you begins to glow. Not strongly, just a faint, scattered luminescence drifting through the vapor like dust motes catching light. At first it seems like some kind of optical trick, but the glow intensifies ever so slightly, enough that the fog stops looking like blank white, and more like illuminated smoke. And right through that faint light, you notice shapes forming beneath you. Large shapes, wide shapes, moving shapes. The fog thins just enough to reveal an immense plain of interwoven fibers, a continuous layer stretching in every direction. From above, it looks like muscle tissue, bundled and braided, flexing in slow, powerful waves. Each movement is tiny, barely noticeable at the edges, but the combined motion across the plane creates a rolling rhythmic shift like watching a gigantic organism stretch endlessly without rest. This is not the surface. This is not a chamber like the one above. This is a structural layer, a supporting platform, made entirely of living material working as one. And it's active. Every few seconds, the level you're floating above rises and falls by a fraction as the fibers contract in long, sweeping waves. These contractions travel outward, never overlapping, never stumbling, each wave following the previous with mathematical precision. Below this layer, something massive must be drawing fluids or gases downward, creating suction that pulls the fibers after it. You're witnessing the global circulation system, the part of the planet that handles the actual movement behind the atmospheric cycling. The clearing window opens again, briefly, reluctantly, giving you a better look. The braided fibers stretch for kilometers in every direction, forming a half-living foundation under the marsh above. Between the bundles, narrow channels glow faintly with bioluminescent streaks that pulse in time with the contractions. They carry fluid, dark, heavy, full of dissolved organic matter and minerals, moving through the system at a slow, deliberate pace. Everything points downward, every channel, every wave, every glowing strand. The planet is moving something toward its depths. A few moments later, part of the layer beneath you shifts more dramatically. A wide seam opens, cleanly, smoothly, revealing a deeper space below. No ripping, no tearing, just a controlled release, like a valve allowing pressure to equalize. You drift closer and look down through the seam. What lies beneath is quieter, darker, still heavily fogged, but not with the bright white of the surface mists. This fog is tinted, darker, almost slate-colored, filled with denser particles that barely move unless pushed by pressure gradients. At first you think it might be empty space, a pocket, a void under the marsh, but then something shifts inside it. Not a shape, a shadow. Large, slow, steady. It slides along the deeper fog, long enough that you can't immediately find where it begins or ends. No edges, no limbs, no defining features, just mass, moving with purpose, not violent, not hurried, just present. The seam closes again before you can learn more, the fibers knitting together seamlessly as if they never parted at all. The fog thickens once more, but the terrain has already changed enough that you don't need vision anymore. The ground pulses, wave after wave, each contraction passing through the layer in perfect intervals. It's impossible not to notice how consistent everything is. The mist cycles above, the chambers in the subsurface network, the large-scale waves here, the movement of fluids below, everything works together. And finally, a pattern begins to form in your mind. Not some guess, not an analogy, but a working hypothesis built from everything you've seen. This world isn't behaving like a planet covered in life. It's behaving like the interior of a single, enormous creature. But that can't be right. Planets aren't creatures. And yet every layer you've passed, the mists, the circles, the channels, the chambers, the underlying braided fibers, is structured, coordinated, and operating with exact timing across the entire globe. The next thin window arrives unexpectedly, showing you something new at the far edge of the braided plain. A fissure. Narrow, deep, releasing vapor that rises more slowly than the surface mists. The vapor is darker, heavier, swirling upward in spirals instead of sheets. This fissure leads deeper, past the transition layer, and toward whatever drives the timing beneath it. The world seems to be guiding you now, even though nothing here has shown the slightest hint of awareness. Structures open when you arrive. Fog thins when you need to see. Channels reveal their function when you're close enough to understand it. Coincidence? Maybe. Or maybe this is just how the planet works. Steady, continuous opening and closing in cycles, so vast and so old they feel personal even when they're not. You descend toward the fissure. The braided fibers pull aside slightly as you near it, not to welcome you, but because they're following their regular contraction pattern, leaving a temporary path open. Warm, mineral-rich fog rises from below. You drift into it. The deeper system, the part that controls every cycle on the planet, lies somewhere under this fissure. And you're going there next. The fissure accepts you almost too easily. There's no sudden lurch, no harsh drop. The walls simply part in a slow, steady widening as the braided fibers continue their contraction cycle, and you slip into the opening as though you were meant to be there. The fog changes instantly, thicker than anything above, warmer, carrying an earthy, metallic flavor that clings to the air. It's heavy enough that breathing it would feel like inhaling liquid. The glow from the transition layer fades behind you, replaced by dim streaks of bioluminescence lining the walls of the fissure. These streaks pulse rhythmically, not in decorative patterns but as functional light, each pulse marking the movement of something flowing beneath the surface of the organic walls. You aren't falling, just moving steadily downward, with the ground rising and falling in smooth waves beneath you as if you're floating through the throat of a living world. The deeper you go, the more pronounced those waves become. They pass through the wall structures in sweeping arcs, each wave pushing fluid downward through thick vertical shafts. The whole fissure hums with motion, like a massive conveyor made from living tissue. The pulses aren't random. They're timed to the surface cycles. You can feel the intervals align in your bones. After several minutes, the fissure widens into a vast chamber. Not an open cavern. Nothing about this world is hollow in the geological sense, but a spherical pocket surrounded by reinforced layers of fibrous armor. The fog is tinted a deep green here, dense but not entirely opaque. You can see enough to make out huge vertical pillars running from the ceiling to the floor, each one flexing subtly, pulling something through itself like a biological pump. Between the pillars lie strands even thicker than the ones in the transition zone above. They're dark, ridged and lined with a row of nodules that expand and contract in perfect sequence, pushing fluids along their length. It's impossible not to see the resemblance to veins, except these veins are meters across, forming a branching network that fills the entire chamber. And the strangest part? They pulse not independently, but as a unified system. When one constricts, the next prepares. When the next contracts, the third swells with incoming fluid. Each movement is part of a larger choreography that doesn't break stride. A slow-moving current drags the fog through the chamber in wide circles. You drift with it, letting the movement carry you past the central pillars. Below you, the chamber floor reveals another layer of motion. A thick pool of dark fluid swirling in slow spirals. It's not water. It's denser, almost syrup-like, carrying flecks of organic material and faint glimmers of light from microorganisms drifting inside it. Every rotation of the pool syncs with the waves that roll through the pillars above. This is a processing chamber, a metabolic heart of the planet. Not metaphorically, literally. The world is digesting something here. Not food in the animal sense. The planet isn't an animal, but atmospheric compounds, minerals, organic runoff from the marsh above. Everything the surface produces eventually filters down through the channels and chambers until it reaches this level, where it's broken apart, reorganized, and sent back upward in the cycles that define the planet's atmosphere. The fog shifts again, thinning just enough that you notice something halfway submerged in the swirling pool. A structure. Round. Massive. Dark. It's easy at first to mistake it for another of the circular organisms from the surface, but this one is different. Where the surface rings are open to the air, this one is embedded into the chamber floor. A flush, wide circle reinforced by thick ridges that radiate outward and connect to the giant pumping veins above. It doesn't pulse like the others. Not visibly. Its motion is slower, deeper, something you feel through vibration rather than sight. This is a regulator, a master valve, one of the main control points for how the surface mist cycles rise and fall. It sits at the center of the chamber like a massive biological engine, not conscious but responsive, not intelligent but capable of processing signals from across the entire planet. The clearing window begins again, faint but long enough to reveal more of the chamber's structure. At the far wall, another fissure splits apart as the layer's contraction follows its schedule. Through that seam, you glimpse an even deeper zone below. The colors change there, from green fog to something darker, tinged with purple and black. It looks thicker, more chemically rich, as if the air there is saturated with compounds too dense to rise back to the upper atmosphere. But it's not the color that grabs your attention, it's the movement. Something enormous shifts in that deeper fog. Not fast, not hostile, just present. The same kind of slow, deliberate mass you saw earlier when the seam in the upper layer briefly opened. But this time it's closer, and you see a hint of structure along its surface. A long, curved form lined with ridges that look disturbingly to the circular organisms on the marsh surface. Not a creature, not exactly. A component, a moving part of the global system, something that travels through the layers deep beneath the planet, adjusting something. Pressure, flow, temperature, gas composition. Whatever it is, its presence alone is enormous enough that the chamber walls respond when it passes, fibers tightening, channels shifting, the floor's fluid spiraling faster for a moment. As the clearing window closes again, the fissure reseals, and the creature, component, whatever it is, disappears back into the thicker fog. The chamber dims, the pulses steady, the mist resumes its heavy drift, and you realize something strange. At no point has anything here reacted to you. Not the surface organisms, not the mist cycles, not the chambers or fibers or pulses, not the shifting mass deep below. You are inside a planetary organism, or a planet-scale ecosystem that behaves as one, and yet you're nothing more than a spectator, a drifting mote in its atmosphere, a temporary presence in a world that has been running on perfect, uninterrupted cycles for millennia. The fog thickens again, signaling the next transition. And somewhere below, deeper than even this chamber, lies the true coordination center, the place where the planet's timing originates, where the cycles begin, and where the deep mechanisms set the entire atmospheric system into motion. The descent into the deeper fissure feels different this time. Up until now, every downward move has carried the same quiet confidence, the same sense that the layers of this world will open when they're ready and close when they're done with you. But as you drop into the increasingly warm fog below the metabolic chamber, there's a subtle change in the air. Not danger, not hostility, just density. A heaviness that makes the atmosphere feel almost physical. Like the deeper you go, the more the planet expects everything inside it to participate. And you're not participating, you're just passing through. The fog thickens until visibility shrinks to almost nothing. At first, it seems like ordinary opacity, just more vapor and organic particles suspended in the air. But after a few seconds, you notice faint lines moving within it. Not winds, not currents, but narrow streaks that drift in long, parallel paths. They're not light, they're not matter, they're motion. Something traveling through the fog in precise, narrow conduits, like traffic lanes carrying signals across the atmosphere. You drift through one of these lanes without meaning to, and the change is immediate. The fog isn't just heavy here, it vibrates. A low, steady hum runs along the particles, passing straight through your body. It's not a sound you hear so much as a sensation you register through your bones. A steady beat, repeating in the same interval as the surface mists. These are pulse lines. You've seen the surface cycles, the subsurface chambers, the braided fibers. This is what connects them. Invisible highways carrying pressure waves, chemical gradients, and signaling pulses to every region of the planet. The fog swirls aside as you drift deeper, and then the world opens up again. You find yourself in a massive vertical conduit, a deep shaft lined with living structures so tall they vanish upward and downward into darkness. The walls are ribbed, arranged in repeating segments that flex gently with each pulse, traveling down the pulse lines. Each flex seems to send another wave deeper into the planet. The fog glows faintly between the ribs, backlighting the entire shaft in a muted slate-grey wash. You follow the pulses downward. Every few seconds, a strong pressure wave passes through the shaft. Not violent, nothing on this world is violent, but strong enough to feel like a momentary increase in gravity. The wave pushes downward, guided by the ribbed structure. Beneath you, somewhere far below, the mass of the planet responds in its own slow rhythm. You keep descending until something new appears on one of the walls. A structure protrudes outward, not a circle, not a fiber bundle, something different. It resembles a wide plate, curved like a dish, with a recessed center. The surface is patterned with delicate grooves that branch outward in intricate fractal shapes. As a pulse travels past, the grooves briefly flicker with faint luminescence before fading again. A receptor. This plate is reading the pulse, interpreting it, adjusting its own grooves to modify the wave before sending it further downward. Dozens of these plates line the shaft, positioned at intervals that grow narrower the deeper you go. Far above, they were sparse. Far below, they're almost continuous, entire sections of the shaft covered in overlapping receptors, each one adjusting the flow of pulses through the planet's lower layers. This isn't communication, it's regulation, a living feedback system keeping the entire atmosphere in perfect alignment. And then suddenly, the shaft begins to widen. The fog thins, not because it's clearing it, but because something below is pulling it downward in great slow spirals. The pressure increases, the air warms again, and a massive chamber opens beneath you. It's the largest space you've seen yet, and it feels deeply enclosed, as though every room above was merely a walkway leading here. This is the lower heart. Nothing here resembles surface life anymore. Nothing resembles plants or roots or wetlands. This chamber belongs to the deep mechanics of the planet, the real machinery behind every cycle. The fog is thinner here, but much darker, carrying heavy traces of minerals, proteins, and dense atmospheric gases. You can see the architecture clearly. Huge vertical columns descend from the ceiling, each one transitioning smoothly into wide, bowl-shaped bases that merge with the chamber floor. The columns pulse, slowly, powerfully, pushing waves of fluid into the floor itself. But it's the floor that draws your attention, because the floor isn't solid. It's a colossal, gently moving membrane that stretches across the entire chamber, dozens of meters thick, elastic, segmentation patterns arranged in repeating hexagons. Each segment flexes inward and outward in perfect time with the pulses coming down the shaft. This is the true pressure regulator, the core of the timing. Every surface mist cycle begins here, with the contraction and relaxation of this membrane. You watch as a pulse travels down one of the columns, hits the membrane and ripples outward in a wide ring. The ring travels across the chamber floor, reaches the opposite side, rebounds, and continues upward through another shaft, heading back toward the surface. And you realize, those atmospheric cycles you saw above, the fog rising and falling, the pressure shifts, the temperature changes, they all begin in this room. This is the origin of every breath that planet takes. The mist cycles aren't natural weather patterns. They're engineered behaviors, not by a mind, but by an ecosystem evolved into a single giant entity. The clearing window arrives here too, though weaker, shorter, barely a handful of seconds, but it's enough to show you something you weren't expecting. Across the far side of the chamber, the membrane bulges upward, slowly, smoothly, with immense force, not like a mechanical piston, not like a lung filling with air. More controlled, more precise, and then something rises with it, something enormous. It breaks the surface of the membrane like a whale surfacing from the ocean, slow, inevitable, completely unhurried. Its body is vast, rounding upward into the fog with no visible limbs or eyes or edges, just smooth, dark, slightly iridescent surface. It isn't a creature in the way you understand creatures. It's a structural entity, a moving part of the planetary system, responsible for adjusting the core membrane itself, a deep regulator. It shifts weight, lowering the membrane at one end, raising it at the other. As it moves, the entire mist cycle above adjusts. The pulses grow stronger or weaker depending on its position. This massive entity never breaks rhythm, never pauses, never reacts to anything except the timing of the pulse lines. For a brief moment, the clearing window holds long enough for you to see faint markings along its surface, grooves, ridges, channels, built for function, not expression. Then the fog thickens again, swallowing the deep regulator whole. The membrane continues to pulse, the chamber hums, the pulse lines above realign. The cycle restarts, and you're still descending, deeper still. Because beneath even this, beneath the lower heart and the deep regulator, lies the true center of the planet's timing system. Somewhere far below, beyond even this massive chamber, the planet keeps its oldest secret. What started this cycle in the first place? The original trigger that taught a world to breathe in perfect intervals. The descent slows. Not because there's resistance, but because the movement here is measured with extreme care. Every pulse that passes through the pulse lines above stretches out, lengthening slightly, as if the planet itself is cautious about what happens at this depth. The fog changes again, darker still, heavier with compounds that no longer circulate freely upward. This air isn't meant to rise, it's meant to stay. The temperature stabilizes here, no warming, no cooling, just steady. That alone tells you something important. This layer isn't reacting to surface conditions. It isn't compensating or adjusting. It's setting the baseline. Visibility is low, but not because of fog this time. The particles in the air are sparse compared to higher layers. Instead, the darkness comes from absorption. Whatever fills this space eats light efficiently, leaving only faint outlines and subtle motion to guide you. And then the structure reveals itself. There is no chamber here in the usual sense, no cavity carved out of living tissue, no hollow space held open by flexing fibers. Instead, the planet becomes solid. Not rock, not in any familiar geological way, but a dense, layered mass of compressed biological materials stacked and reinforced over incomprehensible timescales. The layers are arranged radially like growth rings, each one slightly different in composition, each one bearing the imprint of the cycles that passed through it when it formed. You're moving through narrow conduits now, not fissures, not cracks. Purpose-built passageways just wide enough to allow pressure, heat, and signal pulses to pass through without disrupting the surrounding mass. These conduits are smooth, polished almost. Their walls don't flex with the cycles anymore. They resist them, shaping and refining each pulse before it's allowed to continue. This is where timing becomes law. Every pulse slows here. Not much, just enough to align perfectly. Micro-adjustments ripple through the conduits as they dampen fluctuations, shave off irregularities, and enforce absolute consistency. This is the deepest regulation layer, and it's ancient. You can feel it in the stillness, in the absence of improvisation, in the way nothing here reacts quickly, because nothing here needs to. Then, ahead of you, the conduits converge. Dozens of narrow passages merge into a single vast structure, a vertical column extending both upward and downward beyond sight. The surface of the column is matte and dark, interrupted by thin, evenly spaced bands that glow faintly as pulses pass through them. Each band lights up for a fraction of a second, then the next, then the next. A downward cascade of light marking the exact passage of time. This is it, the origin shaft. Every atmospheric cycle on the planet traces back to this column. You drift closer and the air grows strangely quiet. Not silent, but insulated. Vibrations from the upper layers barely reach this depth. Even the immense contractions of the lower heart are muted here, reduced to gentle pressure shifts that the column absorbs without effort. At the base of the column, something becomes visible. Not a machine, not a creature, not a structure with moving parts. A core, spherical, enormous, perfectly still. It's embedded directly into the surrounding mass, fused so completely that there's no seam to mark where it ends and the planet begins. Its surface is smooth, interrupted only by thousands of tiny depressions arranged in exact geometric patterns. Each depression responds when a pulse arrives, dimpling inward slightly, then relaxing again. This is the timing core, not alive in the usual sense, not conscious, but active. The core doesn't generate pulses, it permits them. Every cycle begins here as a pressure differential, a tiny imbalance allowed to exist for just long enough to propagate upward. The core decides how much imbalance is acceptable, how strong the initial wave can be, how quickly it must stabilize. Nothing else on the planet overrides it. The fog above, the circles, the chambers, the deep regulators, all of them respond to what happens here. You realize something quietly unsettling. This system didn't evolve by accident. Not because it's intelligent, but because it's too stable, too resistant to drift, too precise over spans of time that stretch far beyond what ordinary biological evolution maintains without failure. This core has been running for a very, very long time. Long enough that entire surface ecosystems have risen, adapted, and locked themselves into its timing without ever needing to understand it. Long enough that the planet itself has forgotten what it was like before the cycles. As you observe, a new pulse forms. It's subtle, barely a change in pressure, but the core allows it. One of the tiny depressions deepens, just slightly. That deformation sends a wave into the origin shaft. The shaft lights up, band by band, as the pulse climbs upward. You follow it, up past the conduits, up past the solid regulation layers, up into the lower heart, where the membrane flexes in response, up into the deep veins, where pulse lines carry the timing outward, up into the subsurface chambers, up into the marsh basins, up into the circular organisms, up into the atmosphere. Minutes later, far above, mist will rise, the fog will thicken, visibility will fall to inches, then it will clear again, and the planet will continue doing exactly what it has always done. You remain here at the deepest point, suspended near the timing core, surrounded by silence so complete it feels deliberate. This place doesn't care that you're here. It doesn't register you at all, because nothing individual matters at this depth. Only continuity, only stability, only the endless repetition of a cycle that keeps an entire world in balance. And now that you've seen the source, there's no mystery left about how the mist clocks work. The question that lingers quietly, uncomfortably is this: what would happen to the planet if this core ever stopped allowing the cycle to begin? Time feels different at this depth. Not slower, just stripped down. There are no cues here, no light changes, no temperature drift, no environmental response except the faint, regular permission of pulses passing upward. The timing core does not mark moments in a way that feels like duration. It marks sequence. One allowance follows another. That's all. You linger near it longer than you realize, and then something subtle happens. A pulse is expected. You can feel the system preparing for it far above. Pressure gradients aligning, conduits clearing, receptors waiting, but the allowance doesn't come immediately. The core remains still for a fraction longer than it should. Not stopped, just delayed. The difference is almost impossible to notice unless you're here, at the source. To the rest of the planet, the delay would be imperceptible. A fraction of a second stretched just slightly beyond its usual boundary. But the system notices. You feel it ripple outward in ways too quiet to register as alarm, but too coordinated to ignore. The conduits above tighten a little more firmly. The origin shaft absorbs the hesitation and compensates, smoothing the delay as best it can. The lower heart flexes with a slightly deeper contraction. The deep regulator shifts its weight by a margin so small it would never be seen from the surface. The planet adjusts. The pulse is allowed. It travels upward as normal. The cycle continues. But now you understand something important. This world is not fragile, but it is aware of its own timing. Not conscious, not thinking. Aware in the way a perfectly balanced system recognizes deviation and corrects it. You drift back from the timing core, letting the origin shaft carry you upward again. The movement feels smoother this time, as if the planet's deeper layers have already accounted for your presence and folded it into the flow without concern. As you rise through the solid regulation layers, you notice changes that were easy to miss on the way down. Some conduits are sealed permanently now, ancient routes no longer needed, grown over and absorbed into the surrounding mass. Others branch off briefly before terminating in dense knots of material, fossilized remnants of older timing architectures. This system has been revised, not redesigned, refined. Again and again. The deeper you go back upward, the more evidence appears that the mist clocks were not born perfect. Early layers show irregular spacing, slight asymmetries in structure, variations in conduit thickness that have since been corrected in newer growth. The planet learned, not quickly, not deliberately, but persistently. By the time you reach the lower heart again, the chamber feels almost familiar. The membrane continues its endless flexing, pulses sliding across it in wide rings that intersect and dissipate without ever colliding. The deep regulator moves through the fog again, repositioning itself along a path you now recognize as necessary for distributing pressure evenly across the planetary interior. It passes without acknowledgement, without reaction. It isn't guarding anything, it's maintaining balance. You drift upward into the pulse line shaft, where receptors flicker softly as pulses pass. This time, you watch how each plate modifies the signal, not by adding information, but by subtracting excess. Every receptor dampens irregularity, shaving off anything that could destabilize the system as it travels toward the surface. By the time the pulse reaches the upper layers, it's no longer raw timing. It's conditioned, filtered, safe. The transition zone greets you with warmth and movement. The braided fibers ripple beneath you, pushing fluids downward as new pulses arrive from above. The fissure that once felt mysterious now reads as functional, opening only when the contraction cycle demands it, closing without hesitation when its role is complete. Nothing here is ornamental. Nothing here is wasted. You pass through the subsurface chambers again, watching how reservoirs fill and drain with exact volumes. No overflow, no shortage. Chemical gradients shift subtly as compounds are routed to where they're needed most, some upward to the mist, others laterally to distant basins, others deeper still to be broken down and reused. The surface circles come back into view during a thinning phase. From below they look less imposing and more precise. Their vast size no longer reads as dominance, but necessity. Each one handles an enormous atmospheric load, distributing vapor and pressure across kilometers of marsh. Smaller circles assist, larger ones stabilize, damaged ones are compensated for by their neighbors. Redundancy is built into everything. You realize now why the system can tolerate delay, damage, even loss, because nothing relies on a single point of failure. Even the timing core doesn't command, it permits. If it faltered, other layers would respond, not indefinitely, but long enough to matter. As you rise back into the mist layer, visibility collapses again, inches, then less. The fog presses in close, but it feels different now, no longer disorienting, no longer concealing. You know what it's doing. Droplets condense at specific heights, vapor thickens in precise concentrations, pressure shifts propagate along known paths. The fog is not hiding the world, it is performing its function. Then the thinning phase arrives. The mist drains away, and the marsh stretches out below you once more. Nothing looks changed. The same circular organisms, the same channels, the same mats and ridges and slow-moving pools. And yet, everything feels subtly more deliberate now that you've seen what lies beneath. You notice how surface life times itself around the cycles. Growth spurts align with clearing windows. Spore release coincides with rising fog. Certain organisms flatten or curl at the exact moment pressure shifts occur. Never early, never late. Life here does not adapt to weather. It adapts to timing. This is not a world shaped by climate. It is a world shaped by a clock. And that clock does not tick in seconds or days or years. It ticks in pulses allowed, denied, shaped, and released from depths no surface organism will ever know exist. The mist begins to rise again. The cycle continues. And somewhere far below, the timing core waits patiently, permitting the next imbalance to ripple upward. Not because it wants to, but because that is what keeps the world exactly as it is. Stable, enduring, unbroken. Back near the surface, the cycles feel faster. Not because the timing has changed, it hasn't, but because the clearing windows are short, and everything that lives here has learned to use them with absolute efficiency. When the mist drains, life moves. When it rises, life pauses or retreats. There is no confusion, no hesitation. The entire marsh behaves as if it's listening to a signal it never needs to consciously hear. During the first clearing after your return, the surface reveals activity you hadn't noticed before. Along the edges of the channels, the vegetation lifts in narrow folds, opening shallow grooves that direct water flow with surprising precision. These grooves appear and disappear in minutes, shaped by tissues that swell and relax in response to pressure changes rather than light or temperature. When the fog thickens again, the folds flatten, sealing the grooves as if they were never there. Across the mats, tiny structures emerge, bulbous nodules no larger than a clenched hand, pushing upward through the fibrous surface. They split open briefly, releasing clouds of fine particulate matter that hang in the air just long enough to be caught by the beginning of the mist's ascent. The particles vanish upward, carried away before gravity can pull them back down. Spores, not drifting randomly, delivered. Further out, along a low ridge, taller organisms respond in kind. Slender columns unfurl segmented fronds during the clearing window, their surfaces lined with fine ridges that trap moisture and gases from the thinning air. As soon as the mist returns, the fronds retract, folding neatly into the main stalks where they're protected from saturation. Every movement is timed to the cycle. Nothing here wastes energy reacting to unpredictability, because there isn't any. The water itself behaves differently in these windows. During the thinning phase, shallow pools become momentarily transparent, revealing layers of suspended life beneath the surface, sheets of microscopic organisms that orient themselves vertically, maximizing exposure to the clearer light. As the fog returns, those sheets rotate flat, stacking into dense layers that sink slightly, riding out the heavier conditions below. You notice movement in the channels again. This time, it's unmistakable. Elongated forms slide through the trenches, their bodies conforming perfectly to the channel walls. They're not swimming in the usual sense. There's no tail beat, no visible propulsion. Instead, sections of their bodies expand and contract in sequence, gripping the waxy lining of the trench and pulling themselves forward. They aren't fast. They aren't aggressive. They're precise. When the mist thickens, they stop. Every one of them anchors itself to the channel floor, flattening against the lining as pressure increases. When the thinning phase begins, they release and continue on, as if responding to an internal timer rather than any external cue. These are not predators. They are carriers. You watch one long enough to see it pause beside a circular organism. A section of its body opens, releasing a thick fluid into a recessed intake along the circle's outer rim. The intake closes. The carrier remains motionless until the next pressure shift, then detaches and moves on. Maintenance. Distribution. Another layer of the system working without waste. During the next clearing window, something even more unexpected happens. At the edge of visibility, a cluster of raised structures resolves out of the fog, shapes that are not circular, not fibrous, not obviously part of the atmospheric machinery. They're taller, more rigid, arranged in loose groups along a slightly elevated ridge. They don't look grown, they look placed. The mist drains just long enough for you to see their surfaces, smooth, mineral-rich plates fitted together with narrow seams. No sharp angles, no straight edges, but unmistakably structured. Their color matches the surrounding vegetation closely enough to vanish completely once the fog returns. This is not the planet's work alone. The window closes before you can examine them further, but the implication lingers. Whatever intelligence might exist here, if it exists at all, does not compete with the system. It hides within it, times itself to it, builds only where the cycles allow. Another clearing arrives. You focus on the ridge again, watching carefully. This time, faint movement occurs among the structures, subtle, restrained. Plates shift slightly, gaps open and close. Something within them adjusts, but nothing emerges fully into view. No signals, no lights, no sounds. If these are dwellings, they are built to vanish. And then you understand. Any intelligence that evolved here would have had no choice but to become invisible to unpredictability, because unpredictability doesn't exist. The mist cycles are as dependable as gravity. Anything that survived long enough to build would have done so by aligning perfectly with the clock, never disrupting it, never demanding more than it provides. You drift closer during the next thinning phase, but the fog doesn't grant you enough time to reach the ridge before it rises again. The structures fade into nothing, swallowed cleanly by the returning mist. It isn't refusal. It isn't secrecy. It's simply timing. The marsh resumes its steady behavior. Channels flow, circles pulse, spores rise and settle, Carriers move and anchor and move again. The world breathes, no, cycles, with the same precision it always has. And now, having seen the deepest source and the highest surface, the system makes sense as a whole. This is not a planet with life adapting to its environment. It is a planet where the environment is the life. The mist clocks are not weather, they are metabolism. And every organism on this world, from the smallest spore to the deepest regulator, exists not in spite of that metabolism, but because of it. The next clearing window approaches, and with it another brief chance to see what else lives in the spaces between the ticks of a planetary clock that has never once lost time. The next clearing window lingers longer than usual, not by much, just enough to matter. The mist drains in its familiar way, sliding downward, thinning into translucent sheets, but this time the air remains clear for several extra heartbeats. Pressure holds steady. The system does not correct immediately. Somewhere deep below, the timing core allows the imbalance to exist just a fraction longer, and something responds. Along the ridge where the rigid structures were last seen, movement becomes undeniable. The smooth plates shift apart, opening shallow seams that had been invisible before. The seams are narrow, just wide enough to admit air, and from within them, darker shapes press outward, testing the clearing window as carefully as everything else on this planet does. No one rushes. Whatever lives here has waited through countless cycles. A few extra seconds changes nothing. Except that now it's enough. A figure emerges, not tall, not imposing, shaped low and compact, with a posture that keeps its mass close to the ground. Its surface isn't skin in any familiar sense. It's layered, flexible plates overlapping one another, matte and damp from the receding mist. The plates ripple slightly as pressure shifts, adjusting themselves instinctively. It doesn't stand fully upright. Instead, it moves forward in a slow, measured glide, distributing its weight across multiple points of contact with the marsh surface. The motion is economical, shaped entirely by the world it lives in. Every pause lines up perfectly with the planet's timing. Another shape follows, then another. They do not gather in the open. They spread out slightly, maintaining distance between one another, each one oriented differently. Not watching you, but listening to the environment. Their heads, if they can be called that, tilt subtly as pressure changes ripple through the air. No eyes are visible, but they do not need them. They are not curious. They are attentive. You notice their bodies align with the cycle in real time. As the mist begins its return, each one lowers its profile, plates flattening, posture sinking closer to the surface. They are preparing to retreat before the fog can interfere with whatever they are doing, which is when you notice what they're doing. Between the rigid structures, the ground has been altered, not dramatically, not violently, but deliberately. Shallow channels have been reinforced with dense material. Certain circular organisms have been subtly reshaped, their outer rims thickened or stabilized. The work is not new. It is maintenance, carried out gradually over thousands of cycles. These beings are caretakers, not rulers, not builders of grand monuments, caretakers of timing. One of them pauses beside a circular organism and places a broad, layered appendage against its rim. There is no tool, no device, just contact. The organism responds by altering its next contraction by a fraction, barely noticeable, enough to fine-tune local mist release. Another being moves along a channel, its body flattening to allow a carrier organism to pass. Once it does, the being presses a plate against the channel wall, sealing a microfracture in the waxy lining with material secreted from its own body. Everything they do is subtle. Everything they do is temporary. Nothing they do leaves a permanent mark. The clearing window begins to close. Mist creeps back across the marsh in low sheets, first hugging the ground, then climbing steadily. The beings respond instantly, without panic. They retreat toward the rigid structures, slipping into the seams as plates close behind them. All but one. This one remains outside for a moment longer, its posture unchanged even as visibility drops. It turns not toward you specifically, but toward the direction you occupy, and holds still. Not acknowledgement, not recognition. Calibration. It is measuring something. The fog thickens further, details blur, edges dissolve. The figure finally withdraws, vanishing into the structure just as the mist reaches full density. The world returns to its steady cycle. Circles pulse, channels flow, carriers move and anchor, spores rise and fall. Nothing looks disturbed. And yet you now understand something essential. Intelligence here does not dominate the planet. It serves it. Whatever these beings are, they did not create the mist clocks. The system predates them by an immeasurable span. But they learned it, mapped it, aligned themselves with it so completely that their survival depends on not disrupting it. They do not build cities because cities would interfere with timing. They do not signal because signals would introduce noise. They do not explore because exploration would demand deviation. They wait. They emerge only when the clock permits. They act only where the cycle allows. They retreat before the mist returns. You drift above the marsh as the next thinning phase begins. The ridge reappears, empty. The structures closed, the caretakers hidden. But now, when you look at the planet, it feels different. This is not a world without intelligence. It is a world where intelligence learned, very early, that the safest way to exist was to become invisible to the planet's largest system and indispensable to its smallest corrections. The mist rises again. The cycle continues, and somewhere beneath the fog, the ones who wait are already preparing for the next window, not counting seconds, not measuring time, but listening to a clock that ticks through pressure, vapor, and the slow, patient permission of a world that has never needed to rush. The long watch after the ones who wait disappear, the marsh does not change its behavior. That, more than anything else, confirms what they are. The cycles continue without hesitation. The next mist release occurs exactly on schedule. Pressure shifts ripple outward. Channels pull and release their loads. The surface organisms flex and settle with their usual precision. Nothing compensates for their presence because nothing needs to. They are already accounted for. As the thinning phase opens again, you remain near the ridge, watching more carefully now. What looked empty before begins to resolve into layers of detail you would have missed without context. The rigid structures aren't shelters in the way you'd expect. They're anchors, points where the marsh has been gently stabilized against long-term drift. Their placement follows subtle pressure gradients in the subsurface layers, reinforcing areas that would otherwise deform too far over thousands of cycles. They are not homes, they are corrections. The ones who wait emerge again, but this time you see more of them. Not many, half a dozen at most, moving with the same restrained efficiency as before. Each takes a separate path, spreading across the ridge and into nearby channels. They never cross paths unnecessarily. They never cluster. They never hurry. One pauses at the edge of a shallow pool where the water's surface has become slightly too reflective during clearing phases. It presses a plate-like appendage into the pool, releasing a thin, dark substance that disperses slowly. In future cycles, the reflection will be reduced, preventing local heating spikes that could desynchronize nearby mist formation. Another tends to a carrier organism, adjusting the lining of a channel just enough to correct a developing bottleneck. The carrier resumes its route without interruption, never reacting to the presence beside it. These beings have no dominance over the life around them. They fit into it, and you begin to notice something else. They are not all the same. Some are broader, heavier, with thicker overlapping plates, built for exertion, for reinforcing structures under higher pressure. Others are smaller, more flexible, their bodies segmented to allow them to slip into narrow spaces and repair delicate features of the system. There is variation here, not caste, not hierarchy, specialization. As the mist begins to rise again, one of the smaller ones hesitates, not because of you, because of the cycle. It pauses beside a circular organism, sensing the timing shift. Something is slightly off. Not wrong, just marginally inefficient. The being presses its body against the organism's rim. The contact lasts only seconds. The organism adjusts its next contraction by an amount so small it would be meaningless anywhere else. Here, it matters. The being withdraws immediately as the fog thickens. During the next clearing window, you watch from higher above, seeing how the adjustment propagates outward. The mist release from this circle synchronizes more tightly with its neighbors. The pressure ripple evens out. The system stabilizes. This is what the ones who wait do. They do not command the clock. They do not alter its schedule. They correct drift. Over longer observation, patterns emerge. They appear more frequently near regions where surface structures have degraded, where erosion, decay, or accumulated variation threatens long-term timing precision. They are rare near regions recently stabilized by deep subsurface shifts. Their presence rises and falls in response to the planet's own self-regulation. They are not necessary all the time. They are necessary eventually. You realize that their entire culture, if it can be called that, is shaped by patience. There is no urgency here because nothing on this world rewards speed. Survival is not about seizing moments, but about aligning with them. The mist rises again, clears again, rises again. Cycles pass. You begin to lose track of how many. The ones who wait come and go, never appearing for more than a fraction of a window, never staying visible long enough to disrupt the surface balance. They leave no monuments, no permanent structures, no lasting signals. The only evidence of their existence is the absence of error. And then, during a clearing window that feels unremarkable at first, something unusual happens. The timing hesitates again. Not a delay like before, a compression. The cycle arrives slightly early. The planet corrects instantly. Deep layers adjust. The lower heart flexes more deeply. The timing core allows a slightly longer next pulse to compensate. But at the surface, the ones who wait respond. More of them emerge than usual. They move with increased purpose, still unhurried but unmistakably focused. Several converge on a single basin spreading out around a cluster of circular organisms. Their movements are coordinated, each one taking a specific role without visible communication. This is not routine maintenance. This is intervention. Something in the system has drifted far enough that passive correction is no longer sufficient. The planet can compensate, but only temporarily. The ones who wait are stepping in to reduce long-term strain. They work through 2 full cycles. During the first, they reinforce channels and rims, adjusting microstructures to redistribute load. During the second, they recalibrate local pressure responses, touching multiple organisms in sequence to smooth timing discrepancies. When the fog rises after the second cycle, they withdraw completely. No one remains visible, and the system settles. The next cycles arrive perfectly aligned. From above, nothing appears different. From within, everything is balanced again. You understand now that this world does not fear collapse. It anticipates it. The mist clocks, the deep regulators, the timing core. They all exist to prevent runaway change. And layered within that system is a quiet intelligence that learned how to listen, how to wait, and how to act only when action preserves the clock. This is not a civilization measured in years. It is one measured in patience. The mist rises once more, blurring the ridge, softening the marsh into pale gradients. The ones who wait are gone again, folded into their structures, waiting for the next moment when the world will need them. And somewhere far below, the timing core continues its work, allowing each pulse in sequence, maintaining a rhythm that has never needed to be hurried, and has never once been left unattended. The final clearing window opens without ceremony, no longer or shorter than usual, no hesitation, no compression, just the mist doing what it has always done, thinning, settling, allowing the surface to exist for a measured span before drawing the veil back again. After everything you've seen, the simplicity of it feels deliberate. Nothing here needs a conclusion. Nothing here needs a finale. The marsh stretches out beneath you one last time. Circular organisms pulse across the landscape, vast and steady, their timing exact. Channels glint faintly as pressure equalizes. Vegetation mats rise and relax, shedding excess moisture, preparing for the next phase. Carriers move along their routes, delivering, receiving, anchoring, releasing. Never early, never late. The ridge where the ones who wait emerge remains empty. No movement, no correction needed. That alone tells you the system is stable. Life here does not mark endings, it marks continuity. Everything exists in relation to what comes next, not what came before. The mist does not clear to reveal a climax, it clears to allow function. It rises to protect, it falls to exchange. It repeats because repetition is the only state this world requires. Even the deeper layers, the lower heart, the pulse lines, the timing core, do not anticipate change. They absorb it, shape it, smooth it until it fits the cycle. Nothing here strives toward progress. Nothing resists adaptation. The planet does not evolve forward, it evolves inward, refining itself around a pattern that has proven resilient enough to last. You drift upward slightly as the fog begins to rise again. The surface softens, edges blur, distance collapses. For a moment, the world becomes nothing but light and vapor, the marsh reduced to suggestion. And in that reduced state, the planet feels most honest. Stripped of detail, stripped of spectacle, it shows you what it really is. A system that learned how to keep itself alive by never rushing. The mist thickens fully. Visibility drops to almost nothing. Somewhere beneath that fog, the ones who wait remain folded into their quiet structures, listening. They will emerge again when the clock demands it, not because they are ordered to, not because they fear failure, but because they understand something no other intelligence ever needed to learn. That survival does not require dominance, only alignment. The timing cord deep below allows another pulse. The lower heart flexes. The atmosphere responds. The cycle continues. There is no final moment here. No silence that signals an ending. No pause that marks completion. The mist clocks do not stop. They do not slow. They do not drift. They simply continue. Mist rising, mist falling, pressure shifting. Life moving in narrow windows between certainty and concealment. And long after you are gone, long after anything that could observe this world has faded, the cycles will still be running, perfectly on time, maintained by systems that no longer need to be remembered to endure. A planet that never learned how to hurry, a world that never needed to end.